So what's up? Hello. Let me give you some contextual information, since that's the word of the moment. Number one, to explain what I'm saying and not saying. At 4 p.m. or so, we have a hard stop here because there's a wedding about to be moving into this room, and we certainly wouldn't want to get in the way of true love. So, so that's thing one. I will probably be doing compressed speech for you and skipping, most likely, my deepest insights. So just, fill them in. Secondly, I had a huge lyrical metaphor going, just because there have been English majors in the room, and I thought I should compete, but those are cut out. Third, I wanted to be grateful and ecumenical and involve everybody who ever did anything relevant to all of this, which almost means every one of you were mentioned in my talk. You are now out. Okay, so losing the power of eyesight. Let me say, number one, that my slides are almost without words in them. Why? Because I think you're visual learners? No, because I didn't know what I was going to say until I heard everybody, and then I had to figure out, since Greg wanted me to both wrap things up but be a true visionary, that I would have to do that. I have been doing that at the end of the table. So you'll see some really pretty pictures. Secondly, I do have a couple of goals to address, and one is consistent with the theme to consider change in the ecosystem and what our community's reaction is or will be to it. And secondly, to consider, as I talk, the interplay between appearance and reality, not only in assertions of evidence or whatever, but in the way one works through the problem of trying to help people to learn, which I think is the main story here. So I guess the, can you see that? Who knows what it is? Oh, good guess. Yes, it is a lake, and it is a specific lake named Lake Tahoe on the California-Nevada border. It looked like this for as long as I can remember, and I started going there when I was very young with my dad. And so I think there's a message in Lake Tahoe, and that is, it seemed to me that it was going to be that way forever, timeless. And in some way, it stimulated me to consider some historical issues, and I'll be very brief about them. But I've been involved in technology a long time, early adopter, kind of interested in trinkets and gadgets because that's what it used to be. And so, one of my 15 husbands was a computer programmer and the best is last, Harry, of course. One of the early ones was involved in computing before there was a Department of Computer Science. In fact, he worked with Jules Schwartz and learned Jovial, and that was the way it went. And they were programming things, and the size of the system that they had was 64K. So he had to be a very, very parsimonious programmer. And what they were programming was the do line trigger that if a bad guy who we used to be friends with recently, but now is a bad guy again, was flying over the pole and hit a certain point, then alarms would go off, things would scramble from Cheyenne Mountain, and, you know, B-52s would save the day. So 64K, think about that. The second historical note is that when I started learning about technology, the big technology to learn about was films. And it was the Why We Fight series. It was Hovland, Lumsdaine, and Sheffield from Yale, and amazing book that if you can find out of print, maybe Greg probably has it. It tells you most things that you are just learning, let's say, in the last 2 years. So again, the picture of Lake Tahoe is that in many ways, not much has changed. Third example is that when I was a grad student at UCLA and working, I had a job involved with early literacy and teaching kids how to read in a programmatic way, not computers. But we thought we were very hot, so we went running around giving kids exams, scoring them by putting a cardboard template on top of what they were doing and Xing things out, getting the performance punched and verified and run overnight in batch programming, and then running back to the schools the next day to give the teachers the results, which was phenomenal to them that they got answers back so fast. So I'm simply saying formative evaluation or assessment as a principle has been around for quite a while. So you could say nothing changes, and therefore you can predict nothing will change, right? Wrong. This is Lake Tahoe, not right there, but close by in Truckee and around the northern side of, in Northern California. There are wildfires, as you know, all over, and they may be doing good from a long-term ecological perspective, but they may not be doing good in the short run. And we have had, I think, a series of wildfires that we need to deal with, involving attention to particular kids that we have overlooked, and issues associated with what our capabilities are, particularly in the US. So there are some of us who think there's a window open right now, and the question is, who opened it, how long will it stay open, who else is open, and what can we do with it? So we've had all the last 2 days lots of answers for what to do with this open window. And I think that many of our colleagues have focused on the ecological ecosystems scenario, and so will I very briefly. I'll start like we do in kindergarten and first grade, because when you're there and you're trying to understand yourself, you start with your family, right? So what's going on with our families? What kind of resources do families have on their own, not with a large S of PBS, but what kind of resources or other assets do families bring to their kids' learning? And let's just talk about one, time. In an environment where they're working parents and great deal of pressure across the socioeconomic levels. So we have questions of assets, questions of value, and in my view, questions of time. So the second big picture item, of course, is teachers and schools. And what we want is high expectations, knowledge and enthusiasm, adoption or generation of appropriate goals for kids, and the ability to execute or bring them about. There are a number of big questions, like how many really good teachers are, except, those who are extraordinarily dedicated would want to stay in the profession now, and how many would really want to go into the profession given sort of the rampant uncertainties that are involved in many classrooms in many states. We'll skip that. But clearly, for many of us, these are the people who are our principal targets. So then the next obvious disruption probably occurred in 2007, was it, when we had iPhones and iTunes and all of that. That really isn't very long ago in sort of the scale of things. And while we know there are going to be many, many more, many weirder, many popping up and dropping down, the important point that I would make is that you can't respond to them particularly unless you like to play. The real issue is what's going on underneath them, and I will come back, back to the surface issues and what's underneath. The other major ecological principle is the political environment here at the national level, but also at the state and local level that really affects what teaching happens, what's allowed to happen, what flexibility there really is. I have very little time, but take a minute to look at those faces. Please. Okay. So it strikes me, it's kind of like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Those of you who are psychologists know they were not people who, discovered the Premack principle or something. That's people in a play that Tom Stoppard wrote about, kind of a side story in Hamlet, but they asked a lot of questions and you couldn't answer them. You had to answer with a question. And that may be a better thing for them to do than make assertions. I would say we're sort of in medieval times where only the jesters among us tell the truth. So here are some other examples of things in the context in which we live. I would expect, and Cassandra liked to say, that there is going to be very aggressive expansion for companies such as this. There's apparently quite a lot of aggression at Amazon, but that's a different story. I am assuming that these companies are going to surround, absorb, or rip away the assessment venue from the people who have it right now. I think that they're going to occupy the educational space in a big way. And despite the fact that there are lots of ambitious startups, I asked my graphic designer to put 1,000 on there, and he's kind of rigid and refused. But the idea was, you all know, Quest people know who I'm talking about. The fact is that only a few of these will sort of make it up the side of the slide, and then they'll probably be absorbed by the other guys who are on the other page. So, what's a researcher to do? My thought is, if you stay looking at the surface, you'll miss the big activity that's going on here. And what we have been talking about throughout is, and I think the three of you spoke this way and others as well, is about how you design things with the appropriate infrastructure so that the surface is not the main thing you look at. And so in thinking about data, for instance, there's a million data points that you may want to be addressing. They may be dealing with emotion, they may be dealing with cognition, and our concern is that you're able to understand what the perturbations are in the surface. The other thing that has been talked about both by Jeremy and by us, I think here and there, is the notion of feature analysis, which essentially is breaking down on a qualitative basis what the characteristics are of interventions or pieces of interventions or assessments to that you can map them and match them to what seems to be best for individual kids. To conclude, I'm simply saying that we need to focus a lot of attention on designing infrastructure and trying to automate that design as best we can. Looking under the sea of data, we really need, I think, advanced measurement and quantitative models that also predict the next steps rather than just sort of bend things in the way that Soren said. And I think we should be focusing on each child and situation rather than the conceptual bundle that we seem to talk about of all children. So we need to get smarter, and I think that involves new design models and not talking about waterfall and agile as if they could never, touch one another, and transfer, relevance, situation, flexibility, cost, and speed. Okay, so Yoda is Yoda, right? But so is the princess. And I think that if we can do this, we can get some insight for better outcomes, whatever those outcomes are that you happen to value. I'm not just talking about test performance. And I think we have to do it with bravery and commitment. So, go and do. Goodbye.